Hello and welcome to Manibil, and welcome to another deconstruction of a Stefan Molyneux video. So it's sort of, yes, I have to do it. Whenever he gets into the big questions like, metaphysics, epistemology, some kind of definition of knowledge, or objectivity, truth, ethics, something like that, virtue maybe, right? And things that sort of approaches these kind of topics, I would like to take it apart, right? And it might also be, I can't rule out that he's at some point is going to, give me a pointer to something that I might actually like, but it's rather the exception, right? If at all. So if you are not aware of my prehistory with Stefan Molyneux, I might recap it a bit, but I stumbled upon him when I listened to some Peter Schiff podcast way back in the day. We're talking 2010 or 2011 or something like that, right? More than a decade ago. And at one of these Peter Schiff shows, this guy, Stefan Molyneux, was a sit-in or stand-in for him, right? And I was like, he was sort of completely left field to me. I had never heard anybody argue quite the way that he did, right? So I was sort of intrigued about him. But first off, I wrote him off as sort of a weirdo, right? So he's goofy weirdo kind of guy, right? But then, I listened to another Peter Schiff, and then he popped up again. And there was at some point where I realized the generality of things rather than, if I look at this, quote, small problem like economy, then that will fix all problems, right? But what I realized listening at the first point or at the beginning to Stefan Molyneux was that it's more like these are generalized problems, right? These are general problems in the thinking. It's the general thinking that sort of eventually manifests itself within, let's say, economy or politics or families and so on. It might actually be, if you wind it back to sort of the Big Bang of philosophy or something like that, right? That it stems from the same problems, but when you get down the line, it looks different if it's in economy, and it looks different if it's in bringing up your children, whatever, right? But there might actually be sort of a common core back in the if you get my drift, right? That was the kind of insight. That's what brought me on board with listening to Stefan Molyneux, because he made me realize that. Now, my problem might be at that point, I didn't know my head from my ass, right? Philosophically, I was just like, okay, I know what I'm being told is propaganda now, right? I know that politics is fucked, right? I know that everything, and what most people are thinking and arguing are just pure bullshit, more or less, right? And I was like, okay, I need to listen a bit more to this guy, right? And I fell into the rabbit hole. Or I was actually, doing a good deal of rabbit holing already at that point, right? But certainly he helped me get further into this rabbit hole. And I at some point realized, okay, philosophy, the way you think about how you think is the road ahead for me, right? I was, at some point, it sort of just dawned on me, this is what it is, right? How you think is, how you get to how you think is the foundations of doing good thinking, in my opinion, right? So sort of a loose way of classifying it. And, as time went on, I was sort of getting more and more deeply embedded in his podcast and so on, until at some point, like 6 or 7 years ago, I felt that I had, first of all, got some ideas about how to get to some kind of moral principle, right? And it wasn't at all along how he approached it, right? It was very different. And the more I thought about this process of getting there, and I was starting to think about writing a book, which is still on the way, right? Yes, I have to get back into it. Yes, I know. And and then I had sort of a metaphysical epiphany that I suddenly realized my materialist approach to metaphysics was completely ridiculous, right? And that really turned it on its head. And like, the more I then listened to Stefan Molyneux, the more crazy he seemed, right? And I was sort of extracting myself from his sort of mental sphere, you could say, right? And the more I listen to him now, the more crazy he seems to me, right? And I have been on his show once discussing metaphysics, where he basically, yelled at me and then muted me out of the conversation, right? Because he obviously didn't have any tools in order to argue these particular points that I was arguing. And he was very prejudiced about what I was sort of attempting to do with him. I'm trying to make him crazy or something like that, right? So I have done what I think I can do at this point. I've also been on his board 3 years ago, and I was kicked out after 4 days for asking questions, right? So it's very clear, to me at least, right, that what he's doing is sort of some kind of cult, right? He might not think of it as a cult, but it is cultish, right? The only thing that is allowed around him is his thinking, right? There's no room for anything else, right? It's my way or the highway kind of approach, right? If you don't agree with him, you must be out to trigger him, right? He's working in this sort of mental... He's probably very afraid of going crazy, right? As I pointed out several times in other podcasts or deconstructions. And I've made a lot of them, right? I might point out. I might recap it in a moment, right? But it's like it comes across as if you are in alignment with him, you are sort of, I love you. Oh, you're so nice. I love you. But if you ask the wrong questions in his mind, right? You're probably out to trigger him or manipulate him or change his mind about his perfect philosophy. It's sort of kind of paranoid, right? It's a kind of a paranoia, I would say. If you can handle somebody else's stance that might be opposing completely to your argument, and then pointing out where it potentially could be incorrect, or maybe that other person has found another avenue that would actually be better than your own avenue, right? So you can't balance it. He can't balance it out. He can't take some other avenue in, try it on for size and see how it goes and argue his way through it. It's more like, well, you're crazy, kind of. And then fuck off, kind of. It's more like that approach, right? At this point, at least. And also that he has sort of basically violated all those fine principles he more or less implicitly or explicitly has stated through the years. Like, he's an anarchist. Okay, then he talks about, spending 4 or 5 years licking Donald Trump's ass, right? And he's an atheist, but he talks about Jesus and religion and I mean, it's somebody who has any kind of integrity should have waken up at this point, if they're listening to Stefan Molyneux, say, this guy is fucking crazy, right? And to get back to my videos about Stefan Molyneux, I have done those at least for 5 years, I think, right? But most notably, I have deconstructed 3 of his books, like Sentence by Sentence, his book Universally Preferable Behavior, his book Essential Philosophy, and his book The Art of the Argument, I think it's called, right? And the one is more awful than the other, right? It's basically sophistry, right? It's a language of somebody who believes himself to be the best philosopher of all time, who's actually merely a mediocre sophist, right? Now, that combination actually makes it good sophistry, because he's probably not really all the time, at least aware that he's actually just a sophist, right? He just wants his opinion to be the right one, and he's going to throw words and philosophy at you until you sort of give in and say, okay, I guess you're right. Or if you don't give in, then there's something wrong with you, right? When you deconstruct his books and his arguments and his philosophy, so-called philosophy, right? It's like somebody claiming to be the best engineer of all time, right? And when you then go and visit him, what you see is somebody playing with Play-Doh on the floor, right? And Lego cubes and so on, right? Trying to establish some kind of house or bridge or something like that, right? And he says, look, I have created the perfect bridge of all time. And you're looking, there's a sort of a pile of dough and Lego, right? I said, that's not how you do it, right? And you say, oh yeah, it's perfect. I've found the Holy Grail. Look, it's over there, right? Oh, I'm great. And if you don't like it, there's something wrong with you. So that's how I see him now, right? He's crazy, man, right? He's crazy. and then that in this particular instance here, I listened on Telegram, where he has a channel where you can hear these things being recorded. So a few days ago, I listened to this, shut up with half an ear while doing something else, right? And at this point, I dumped in midway through this, but after a couple of like 10 or 15 minutes, he started to talk about this. So this is sort of 1 hour and 5 minutes into it, where he starts. There's a question from the listeners here, right, about UPB and lying. And I was like, okay, now this could be interesting, right? Now I don't remember exactly what was discussed, because again, as I said, it was with half an ear, right? But I remember thinking to myself, I might want to deconstruct this and get back to it, right? Because I remember there was something that sort of triggered me, right? So that's what I'm doing now. I'm going into it at 1 minute and 5 in a video on Rumble called Wednesday Night Live, How I Wish I Were Wrong. So why don't we just hit it?
Does lying go against UPB? Does lying? I wonder if a solid case against lying would shift the view of the mainstream of government lies. So,
yeah, but if let me just, before we get further into it, let me just state how I think about, quote, lying, right? Okay, now lying must be about knowledge, right? I can't lie about something that nobody else than me can access, right? I guess I could lie about it, but there is no fucking way in the world you can get to whether or not I'm lying, right? If I say I'm feeling pain and I'm not feeling pain, there's no fucking way you can get to whether or not I'm feeling pain, right? Now, if I say that's an elephant and I don't experience elephant, right? It's would be called that would be a lie from my point of view, right? Because I'm the one who does not experience that elephant. I am making a proposition about, right? Now, if you're standing beside me and listening, and I'm pointing in that general direction, and you're looking and said, I don't see an elephant, right? Which is the proposition is false. Then you standing beside me, you can never get to whether I'm actually lying or not. For that simple reason, you do not have access to my experiences, right? I could be experiencing elephant and saying, that's an elephant. No matter how ridiculous you find it, that there should be an elephant there. If you're standing in an open field and there's nothing but grass as far as the eye can see, right? Standing on the plains there, African savanna, nothing is there except there's somebody claiming there's an elephant over there, right? And you're looking and you still don't see a fucking elephant anywhere, right? You might try ask to clarify, do you mean right over there? Or do you mean 10 kilometers there? Or what do you mean, right? No, over by that little bush over there, right? There's an elephant. And you say, well, I don't see a fucking elephant, right? Now, you can never claim that to be false. It is false for you, right? If you are not experiencing elephant, that proposition is false for you. But being false for you is not the same as you know or have insight into whether or not that other person is lying, right? For the simple reason you do not have access to their experience. And the experience is that which they're referring to. When they're pointing, right? They're pointing from their inner experience and pointing in something that you might be a part of outside their experience. So therefore, even if you have an access to the outside, right? then what we are dealing with here when we are talking about propositions, it's a linguistic statement that you are comparing your experience to, right? And because you have access to the proposition, but you only have access to your own experience, you can never get to whether or not any other person is lying, right? But at the same time, I have to remind you that it's not that you can't act as if they're lying, right? You just can't say you're lying. You can say it, but you're just manipulating words because you cannot get to that conclusion because you do not have their experience. And that is what they're doing. They are comparing their experience to a proposition. You have the proposition, you have your own experience, you have the proposition, but you do not have the other experience, right? So you can never get to whether or not somebody else is lying. Done.
No, lying does not go against UPB because lying is not inflicted on other people. Right?
What do you mean it's not inflicted? Why would I want to lie if I were not trying to inflict something? No, I'm not. I'm not beating a lie or whatever statement into your face or something like that with a stick. But I'm trying to do something. I might get a result at some later point, right? I might be lying about something that you cannot experience, right? That's why they always put God somewhere you can't go and experience it. If somebody says, yeah, I believe in God, and he's just around that corner there, right? Then you will say, okay, I'll go check, right? No. It's always beyond the clouds and in the heavens where you can't go and check, right? So that you're always in the zone of, I cannot refute this. I cannot get to my own experience so that I can refute this statement myself, right?
If someone lies to you, who's in your life voluntarily, right? Somebody lies to you, your friend lies to you all the time, they're not inflicting.
One thing that just popped into my mind, right? Somebody very concerned about somebody else lying might actually indicate somebody who's very accustomed to lying, right? If you are a very sort of a, what's it called? A prone liar, what's it called? Somebody who's very, somebody who's sort of, manipulating the ideas of what is actually within some kind of statement that could be true or false, right? Propositional things, right? Would be very concerned about lying because he's constantly in that mental frame, right, of lying and being sophist and so on, right? So he or she would be very concerned about other people lying because it's constantly on his own plate, right? I don't care too much about people lying. I have my own experience to go with, and I'm fine with that. I'm trusting. I am the best thing I have is my own experience, right? So if somebody says there's an elephant and I don't experience elephant, I'm saying, fuck you, you're crazy. I'm going the other way, right? So I don't really care about these. And there's also this old problem with, Nazis by the door, right? 1943, and somebody knocks at the door, and it's some what you would call Nazis saying, well, where's your children, right? I would say they are at at their aunt or something like that, right? Even though they're in the attic, right? So, yeah, I would be, exemplary of a liar in that case, right? And it would be fine. Why not? Who is it that had created some kind? Who's the master of the universe who can tell you it's not okay to lie? Of course, it's okay to lie. Nobody deserves whatever truth you think you have. Nobody is deserving of that, right? It's always people who want to moralize into you being subservient to them by, you have to tell the truth, right? So they can get what they want. Fuck them, man, right? Lie all you want. Don't expect people to just, if you always lie, it might not be a good in some other situation. If you have an agreement with somebody, you need to tell the truth about this, that, and the other, and you don't do it, or they feel that you don't do it. It might be detrimental to you, but it's up to you what you want to do, right? I mean, if it's necessary to lie, I said, go ahead, man. I'm not going to stop you, right?
Then there relies on you. You're choosing to be in a relationship with someone who lies to you. So lying is not, UPB is for things that are coercively inflicted upon you. Lying is not
Coercively inflicted upon you. Could you be more specific? If somebody says, give me your money, and it's called tax, isn't that coercive? Even though there's nobody beating me with a stick, right? Or anything like that. It's just, we have the police and the army and so on. Would you mind sending me, 40% of your money, right? And it's not like, no, I know how it works. So they don't have to go and beat me in order to get my money, even though, basically my employer, takes my money and gives it to somebody else, right? Without my, with my explicit, agreement. So it's just, I like these things to be very clear, because what he's going into here is the so-called non-aggression principle, which is something he basically more or less dragged in through the back door of his UPB book, where he sort of created this sort of framework for ethics that can validate any kind of moral statement, right? I'm not saying it can, but that's his claim, right? But what he basically did was, okay, he already had the non-aggression principle. He probably had that for 30 or 40 years, right? Then he's creating a moral framework called UPB that validates the non-aggression principle. So he can keep going with the non-aggression principle. So he created a 150-page book in order to validate the non-aggression principle. So that should spell out, a gender-driven philosophy. It's confirmation bias. He needs to create something to validate that which he is already using, right? And so it's this kind of, it's not coercive, and so it already starts to sound fluffy, right?
Coercively inflicted upon you. Now, if someone, let's say you're running a restaurant, and someone says, I found a rat tail in the soup, and they publish that, and it's a falsehood, and your restaurant...
It's a falsehood. But how can you, as not being the one claiming to find it, know whether or not it's false? How can you know that? How can you, maybe I shouldn't say no, how can you get to control it? Because you were not the one finding that in the soup, right? So you can only say, well, we have never had rats in our restaurant, and nobody has ever talked about rats before, and but that doesn't prove anything. That's just evidence that might point in a general direction, but it's not a knockdown insight into what you claim to be falsehood, right? So it's like this. His problem is that he thinks what he's experiencing is objective reality, and if he hasn't seen something or experienced something, it's not there, right? Even though somebody else has experienced something else that he does not have access to, he would claim that he can get to whether or not something is true or false. Well, he can never get to it, as I just said, right? He can only try to manipulate you in some way that might, evidential to him, point in a direction whether or not you're lying or not, right? From your, how you're, your flickering eyes and you're getting sweaty, or, something like that. Still, it's not the experience. It's the evidence to something that he classifies or reasons towards might entail whatever is going on in that mind, right?
Business collapses and you lose $1 million. Well, that's a violent infliction, right? Because they're now basically taking your business from you, harming your reputation. So that to me is a UPB violation, which is why you sue them and get your money back or whatever, right? Try and get your money back from them. So because you're not choosing to be in a relationship with someone who's telling lies that are directly harming your financial interest in a sort of very provable way. You're not choosing that. You didn't choose to be in a relationship with the guy who lies about you in reviews and says that he found a rat tail in the soup or whatever. So lying is in the realm of aesthetically preferable behavior. So 3 categories of behaviors.
Yeah. Okay, so there's 3 categories as if it's sort of handed down from him from the skies, right? He doesn't argue for it. He doesn't present his thinking here, right? He presents the conclusions, right? He doesn't need to give any philosophy, even though he calls himself help support philosophy, right? He's not giving you philosophy. He's giving you what potentially could be conclusions of philosophy and bad philosophy, in my opinion, right? It's just that there's this, that, and the other. That's it. You have to obey me, right? That's not philosophy. Giving you conclusions is not philosophy. Philosophy is that which is between conclusions, right? If you don't have that, if you do not have that between conclusions, you should not just follow those conclusions, right? Because you're not presented with those steps that enables him to make these sort of classifications, right? And also, when you're dealing with ethics and you have 3 categories, right? So you're standing there and somebody touches your bicycle, and is it aesthetically, is it this, and is it the other, right? All these sort of categories that floats around in his mind, you can't work with that in any kind of everyday, right? And you don't have a hotline where you can call up Stefan Molyneux. Yeah, I'm standing in this situation. Somebody is, touching my bicycle. Is it aesthetical? Is it, whatever, right? It doesn't work.
In UPB, in the analysis. Neutral, running for the bus, sleeping in, just neutral.
Running for the bus, right? That is neutral compared to what exactly, right? Running, if you're running on somebody else's road, then it's not neutral, is it? Right? If you're a Nazi running after a school bus, right? Is that neutral? I'm just trying to come up with, and then he would say, well, that's a gray area. Oh, you kind of the details. You go away, right? Don't challenge my stupid philosophy. Now, I'm sort of satisfied that his so-called ethics has never gained any traction, which it hasn't, right? Nobody of any sort of media stature anywhere has, as far as I understand, presented any kind of positive and sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? Somebody saying, well, this guy has actually found something. Listen to me. I understand it this way, and I think it works because this, that, and the other, right? Nobody has done anything like that. Nobody. But what I've been able to find, including myself, you could say, right, is a whole lot of people, more or less, coherently, arguing how shitty his philosophy is, right? How bad his UPB book is, how bad he is at arguing, Hume and metaphysics and everything. It's a pile of junk, to be honest, right? I have found nobody who has given him any kind of leeway into, well, you might take this seriously because this, that, and the other, and so on, right? Nobody of any stature I can think of, right? It doesn't prove anything, right? It's evidential, right? But if it is the holy grail of philosophy, why is he not trying to get it over? Why is he sitting here in his living room or his basement or whatever it is, talking to those who have no influence, right? If he has found the holy grail of philosophy, you should be fucking pounding on the doors of universities and so on, right? I don't know what. I mean, maybe that's not the avenue. But it seems like you have folded into just talking to yourself, basically, right? Telling those few people who are actually still listening to this garbage that you are perfect, right? You are helping philosophy by helping me, right? And there's a sort of three, robbers and a hooker listen to him, right? ah, ah. It just doesn't fit together, right? I mean, it's like what I'm hearing at this point is somebody who has managed to get so many donations and mainly crypto, right? So that he's a multimillionaire now. He doesn't need to do this. He doesn't need to do philosophy, right? He just, in order to have something to do, he just needs to keep the kettle on a low boil here in order to justify himself still sitting in his basement talking to his microphone, right? I mean, nobody in the right mind would take his ethics seriously. It's atrocious how bad argued it is, right? It's beyond atrocious in my opinion, right? It is somebody who has no fucking clue what he's doing, right? And at the same time, he calls it the holy grail of philosophy, right? And that kind of disconnect from self-criticism and your own limitations in doing whatever X, right? And it should also shine through the philosophy. There is some kind of built-in appeal to skepticism and rejecting your own, if you're just using words and juggling words around, right? And thinking that you have created some kind of miracle here, right? You should be aware of that yourself. That should not be my philosophy. My philosophy should not be based on me juggling words around, right? And rejecting big parts of, mandatory kinds of philosophy in order to get to my point. I can't just step into ethics without having done rigid epistemology based on rigid metaphysics, right? But that's exactly what he does, right? He basically says that in his book on UPB that he doesn't have to go into that because, he has so much work to do in ethics now, right? And he doesn't need to prove that murder is wrong and things like that, right? That should be a red flag immediately when you read his shit, right? Okay.
Neutral. There's no moral or aesthetic quality to them, right? And then there's aesthetically preferable actions, which is think.
Well, if I have told my daughter to not run after the bus, asked her to not run after the bus, and she has agreed, I won't run after the bus, I will only walk to the bus. And then she runs to the bus. Would you call that neutral? I'm just asking. I mean, I don't understand these classifications, right? Because it's an interpretation. There is nothing there's no interpretations that are, I can't find words today, I don't know what, that are inherently neutral. It depends on your ideas of how it should unfold, right? I don't want Nazis running after buses, right? Serial killers or rapists or whatever, right? Or crazy feminists, whatever, right? Is it neutral? I don't know, but yeah, maybe some part of it you could say is neutral because nobody is being stabbed with a knife to the chest at the moment, right? But somebody saying there is certain events that are always neutral is bullshit, right? It depends on the situation and interpretation and the prior agreements and so on, right? It's ridiculous that he's arguing this fashion because he doesn't know what the hell he's doing, right? And basically, apparently, he doesn't care. All he wants to do is trying to come across as Mr. Philosophy and give me money, right?
Things that are better. and more positive and things that you want.
Positive is subjective, right? So aesthetic this or aesthetic that, that is a, you know, if anything, it's subjective, right? I prefer this, I like this, this is aesthetic pleasing, this is aesthetically preferable, whatever, right? It's all subjective. It's all an interpretation. And whether or not you like that interpretation or not, you have to be a subject in order to get to it. They're not aesthetics floating around outside, arriving through your ass or something like that, right? It's an interpretation of your experiences.
But you can't enforce them because they're not enforced upon you. So if you have a friend who's chronically late, that's annoying and it's hard to plan.
If I have an agreement with somebody that you shouldn't run after the bus, right, and that person does it, isn't that inflicted upon? It's inflicted on our agreement, right? So it's a violation of our agreement. Isn't that immoral? How do you get to it, right? How do you understand these things? It's not that easy. It's not as easy as you present it here, right? You present something as very easy, which is also so very, 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 very difficult to argue for this. And that's why he possibly doesn't present you with the arguments. He just states it as if it's sort of obvious, right? Right? Sophist.
And you start off, the late people are annoying because you're sitting there for half an hour waiting for them to show up because you're supposed to go to a movie or something. And then by the time they show up, you're sort of annoyed enough that you can't really have fun with them at the movie. Like, it's really a crappy thing to do on a repetitive basis to be.
A crappy thing, is that immoral or is it aesthetics, right? And virtue, when do we get to virtue? It's also a term he uses, right? So it's like it's all based on his opinion. This is his opinion that he presents as some kind of objective philosophy of some kind, right? It should ring all the bells and all the flags, right? Somebody upgrading their own experience to some kind of objective standard. Whoa, be fucking careful, right?
Late. And I'm not talking about 5-10 minutes it's going to happen, but
Oh, 5-10 minutes, but 12 minutes maybe then. 13? No, a matter of degree. So when we get to 13:29, now it's too much. Who settles that? It's an appeal to an authority if it's a matter of degree, right? And are you that authority? Is it your particular subjective opinion about what is good and what is bad, or what is aesthetically pleasing, or what is neutral? So we always have to, have a hotline to you in order to get around in the world? Fuck off, man.
Sort of chronically late people. So it is preferable to be on time, but you can't shoot someone for being late.
Why is it preferable? What do you mean by preferable? By who? By you? Are you going to tell me what I should prefer? Right? If a bomb exploded at minute 5 into the movie, it's actually preferable to get 10 minutes late, right? I mean, how do you get to these fucking conclusions, man? It's delusional. It's your own fucking stupid subjective opinions that you upgrade to some kind of standard. Oh, man.
Right. I mean, you because they're not violently imposing their will upon you. You're thereby.
What do you mean by violently? I would like him to fucking define what he means by violent, right? What is it to be violent, right? And aggression, this sort of aggression is a certain kind of violence, apparently, right? And non-aggression is a non-certain kind of violence principle, right? So it all comes down to how he defines violence and how it can be known and how it can be justified or referred to or anything like that, right? Violence is a subjective interpretation, right? It has to be. And I would even say it has to be based on some kind of agreement. If some man wants to be slapped in the ass by a woman, right? That's violent. But he wants it to be done maybe, right? How would I get to that? Well, I can't. Just by looking at it, right? I can't get to whether or not he wants it or not, right?
by choice. So there's aesthetically preferable actions such as being on time, being reasonably polite, reasonably
reasonably this and reasonably that, right? And he's Mr. Oh, don't give me those fluffy boundaries and gray areas. And he's constantly, handing you gray areas as some kind of argument or validation of his weird categories, right?
reasonably diplomatic, things that are positive but not enforceable.
Well, what do you mean they're positive? What does it mean it's positive now? Now there's a new word in, right? Positive. Okay, those are positive. Is that his subjective judgment again? This is positive, this is negative, whatever. Who the hell does he think he is, man, right? He can hand out positives and negatives and neutral and whatever, aesthetic pleasing and like his subjective experiences are sort of the highest standard of objectivity in the world. What kind of megalomaniac would have that approach other than this stupid idiot, right? Holy fuck, man.
And so there's neutral, morally neutral actions, aesthetically preferable actions, things which can be universalized. Everyone can be on time. Things which are reciprocal. You don't like it when people are late and make you wait. Therefore, you shouldn't make other people wait. The sort of do unto others thing. And then
Where does that come from, man? Do unto others? I don't care about the do unto others, whatever, Christian book people are referring to. How did you argue for it? Don't just bring in some conclusion and some kind of rules made up by somebody without any kind of philosophy backing it up, right? You need to present the philosophy, not the conclusions, mate, right?
That's UPB, truly universally preferable behavior, which is to refrain from force and
force. Now it's force. And there was violence. And I don't know if he's mentioned aggression, but I would surprise if he haven't, or that he won't, right? So again, it's the same scenario as whenever I deconstruct him, he just throws words at you, new word, a new term that is sort of a new term that is slightly different, but still the same as some term he just used. He's sort of moving the chess pieces around the board now, right? So to make you chase him, right?
Fraud, which is a theft, right? Or defamation or slander, which has direct...
These are all interpretations. You can't go around and looking at people and say, fraud, right? How do you get to that? It's an interpretation, it's not an objective. Right? You have to be a part of that scenario and part of an agreement of the experiences these people have in that scenario. In order to have any idea what is going on, you have to be a part of it, right? You have to be a part of that agreement. Otherwise, shut the fuck up, man. Go away. Don't come here and give me your fucking bloody, subjective observations and claiming them to be some kind of objective so you can go and punish me, whatever. Fuck off, man.
Material. Negative consequences, so that is right. All right. SSRI pills, they seem to be prescribed for all sorts of stuff. Yeah. Well, I mean, if the government is paying for things, the most expensive solution is the optimal solution. I mean, I think it's fairly, if you read the books by Peter McCullough, you read the books by Robert Malone and other people, and again, I can't evaluate these things, I'm not a doctor, but they make a reasonably solid case that there were cheaper options. Then what did they give, $1 billion to Moderna to develop these?
Okay, so I think we are out of. So it's just, I mean, this sort of handheld, I remember it as if there was more. Maybe there is more coming up later here, but I think we'll keep it here, right? I think I got my point across. And if this is what he calls philosophy, right? Why would you help support this, right? This is ridiculous, man, right? There are no definitions. He just throws words at you, and this, subjective, this, and objective, neutral, done. What? There's no heads or tails anyway. It's just a bunch of words, right? There is nothing. He's a philosophical idiot who thinks he's brilliant, right? I mean, there's nothing here to I can't. It's not like now I can go out in the world and behave morally or check whether or not somebody else is behaving morally. All I've got is some words and something that is neutral and so on, right? It's like, fuck off, man, right? Do it rigidly at some point, God damn it, right? And your book is certainly not rigid. It's a big pile of trash, right? And the conclusion must be he cannot do it. The only thing he can have any success with is trying to pretend to do it, right? If you have any skills in doing rigid philosophical thinking, you will immediately understand that what he's doing is not philosophical, right? It's not rigid philosophical, rigidly philosophical. It's just what I would call sophistry. He's just throwing words at something that he already understands where it needs to go. It needs to classify this as a good moral principle, so I'm going to throw words in this direction in order to it to become the case, right? He has to validate the non-aggression principle somehow, right? And that's what he creates this weird system he calls UPB in order to validate what has already been classified as a moral principle. So, in other words, another thing that might be interesting is, well, why doesn't he go back to those who actually started this principle and look at their philosophy, right? Why does he have to come up with a whole new system of philosophy or ethics in order to validate it? That's kind of weird, isn't it? Is it just me, right? No. Back to scratch, right? Back to the drawing board. You have in my opinion, any kind of moral principle, any kind of moral direction, what would that be? Rules of any kind that are moral in nature, has to be based on foundational metaphysics through epistemology, a definition of knowledge, a definition of what it means to be true, a definition of objectivity, good ethics based on all these things that very clearly arrives at something that seems to be, it must go in this direction, it must become this kind of principle. That's what he has to do. He can't just start a book by saying, oh, I don't have to prove that murder is wrong. Now I'm going to do ethics. Right? Fuck off, what an amateur, right? Okay. Oh, I can't believe I was inspired by this moron, man, right? At least I woke up at some point, right? Okay, 48 minutes in. I think this is it. Please share, like, and subscribe. Leave a comment. Try out the Discord board link below. Maybe consider a donation if you think I'm doing good work here. Otherwise, see you in the next one. Have a nice day.